Welcome to Rodney Veal's Inspired By, a production of Public Media Connect, the regional partnership of CET in Cincinnati and Think TV in Dayton. Rodney Veal, our host for this podcast, is an independent choreographer, interdisciplinary artist, and all-around fan of all things arts and creativity. And he's excited to share another great conversation with you. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Rodney Veal's Inspired By. I'm super excited today to talk to a friend, an artist, a community activist, a warrior for truth, justice, and other folks who need help with with their artistry, not only with their artistry, but with life in general. Glenna Jennings has been a friend for over 13 years, and it is super excited to have her on the podcast. So welcome, Glenna.
Great to be here. Thanks, Rodney.
I love it. I'm so excited. So Glenna, for those who don't know, you're not only a phenomenal photographer and an educator, and all these great things, but there's an origin story, which I love. How did you get to Dayton, Ohio?
Oh my gosh. I arrived here with a broken leg to interview at the University of Dayton in 2011. I was coming out of graduate school in San Diego, California. I, at the time, was running artist-run space in downtown Los Angeles. And things were starting to get real in downtown Los Angeles. And things were about to get real for me, and I had no health benefits. So University of Dayton would supply that for me. I thought, this is great. It's a one-year contract. I'll go over to the Midwest for a couple years. My mother is a Midwesterner and thought that I would be in a better place. So once I got here, I absolutely, within the first few months, started meeting people like you. And suddenly the access to people that were really involved in the community was so much simpler than in Los Angeles, for example. And there was a lack of the kind of pretentiousness that we contended with in Los Angeles when we were trying to get things done, right?
Right.
And so meeting Peter Benkendorf and you, Rodney, and working with the Blue Sky artists who are coming back that first summer in 2012, the summer of 2012, was really like a creative renaissance in my life and work.
It's taking me down memory lane. I was like this whole notion when we met and we were in the halls at UD all hours of the night. You know, you were working, I was working, Catherine was working. We were just, I think we got like punch drunk because we were there so late.
Yeah.
Which was such intensity. I mean,
and now I use wallpaper in my practice all the time, but we were sure having a time learning how to use Phototext.
Right. I remember that. I love it. And so Jenna, like the whole notion that you touched upon something that's really kind of important. You said there weren't the pretentiousness and the barriers. I mean, I think a lot of people don't really understand that's what makes kind of the Midwest and particularly Dayton, Ohio, like it's special applesauce. You could pretty much walk up to anyone and kind of get something started in this town. And is that what kept you here, or is it just amongst other things?
I honestly feel that it is. It was probably a right time in my life. What I learned after coming here was a non-traditional student in my life quite often. I went to graduate school in my 30s. I was coming to Dayton, entering my 40s. And so I was more looking for community and collaboration than I was looking for kind of fame, so to speak, right? And the kind of environment, I loved my graduate program, still close with many people there, but the environment that I was in both my undergrad and my graduate art world is really about competition. You know, I really feel at the end of the day, they create an ethos that is about you making it past a barrier and surpassing your peers, even as you're supposed to be supporting one another. And I, having come out of a background of also teaching English as a second or other language and been involved in a lot of international communities, I just had always felt I wasn't doing me any good to be in that kind of a world. And we're entering this time now, or this shift that happened since I arrived here over a decade ago, that we're caring more about mental health, wellness, and we're also, I think and believe that we're learning to care more about one another. And so the kind of environment that was offered to me here helped me make that switch from what had been sort of like a competitive creative environment into a collaborative environment. And people use that term all the time now, but obviously that wasn't going to happen overnight. Suddenly it's 13 years later. It's taken time to build trust in the communities where I work and with the people with whom I work. And, the blood, the sweat, the tears, all the stuff.
But I think there was also a lot of laughter. I mean, you
Yes.
gotta understand, we had some really folks who understand that, like the Blue Sky Project. I was an artist in residence at Blue Sky Project, which is a project that was started by Peter Binkendorf and Makita Ahuja, and they had brought the program to University of Dayton, and I was lucky to be an artist there, and then I was lucky to do it again as sort of kind of like a supervisory capacity. And what I loved about it was that sense of, we're all in this together. Let's just all be artists and just mash up against each other, stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning, figure out how to print photographic wallpaper, how to throw glitter on people and turn them into Greek gods and goddesses, which thankfully, Glenna, you did that for me, which was super
Yeah,
awesome.
I just found those photos the other day. I'm like, man, I don't look like that anymore.
None of us look like that anymore.
I
I remember I did a self-portrait. And so it was just, I remember that time. I thought, Glenna picked your timing was perfect
Yeah.
for kind of jumping into that. And so speaking of collaboration and, because your work is all about community. I mean, I've always felt like it's not about, I'm Glenna, I'm the photographer, through my lens. It's more like, it's what I see in the world of bringing people together. And the dinner series, do you remember when we did in the old collaboratory space where we had a sit down dinner and the walls were covered with your wallpaper and you took photographs? That was super cool.
That was our summer supper series. And, in many ways, that was the genesis of what became now Dinner in the Desert Kitchen, when I formed the first course on art and social practice for the University of Dayton. I worked with a sociologist, Dr. Ruth Miller Thompson. And, the university, too, was just on the cusp of trying to do cross-disciplinary stuff and be serious that they're doing it. Like that the buzzword of cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, all the words was being thrown around at the time. But the structural aspect of it, they weren't really making the space for it to happen. We had to make that space for ourselves.
Right.
They were like, yeah, we'll like the institution will say, yeah, we'll use those buzzwords and we'll use your name attached to them, but we don't really have money or space for this. But slowly, University of Dayton was so willing to let me get out of my own silo and explore in these other departments and work with these other folks, that the space started to be made, right? So when my friend Ruth and I, and my friend Issa Randall, who is also an artist who
Yes,
lived in
fantastic.
Dayton for a very long time,
Yeah.
Cornelia Randall's son, we came together and thought, how do we talk about inequity? How do we talk about racism? This is 2014 when we started having this conversation. And we arrived at food as a means to start that conversation with undergrads.
Right.
Now, at the time, I had already been doing this series about people eating and drinking together around the world. So they're like tandem, but they're definitely connected. And I've continued to make that work. The most recent piece, in fact, is with my Gem City Market community partners on a trip to Mondragon, Spain with Co-op Cincy and Co-op Dayton. I have now photos of, Ina Maha Selassie and Cheryl Gardner and folks eating together around a table in Spain at the end of the journey.
So that, because it was a recent trip. That was April. So, oh my God, you've got, so this has been ongoing. It was kind of cool. What I loved about it is it blended, it kind of bled over in many ways to what was happening in the community, because it was kind of, I thought, wow, how prescient with the Gem City Market. And we'll talk about that in a second. But then it was like everybody's having this conversation about food deserts.
Mhm.
It was like you were just communing with the universe and realizing that this is the subject that
Well,
we need to cover.
I came from a real geographic desert to the Midwest. I am a self-referred desert rat. And when I first called somebody trying to get an apartment here back in like 2011, and it ended up, I believe the apartment I was calling about is somewhere right where I live now, which is Grafton Hill, towards the west side near Salem Avenue, near Gem City Market. And they said, it's a food desert over here, right? And I was like, food what? I had no clue. So that it was about a year off still before I would start the research into food deserts and the collaborative work in the community. But that was a spark. And now I actually do live in the food desert that this person warned me out of. And at the time,
you are there. Yes.
And I mean, this is a lovely community near the Dayton Art Institute. It's a mixed income area. But I moved here very purposefully to kind of take part in this conversation because I don't have kids. I wasn't thinking about the school system and some things that some of my other either University of Dayton peers or others were doing. And so I chose to live here. And it turned out that my friend Issa Randall's mother, Vernelia Randall, lived right next door. And that was just the moment I walked into this house, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I'm seeing the notes about food desert versus food apartheid. We still have been using the term food desert because people recognize that term, right? And there were some people who were having some contention about the term apartheid as well, and its ties to sort of other political systems that was making some folks feel uncomfortable with that term. But I definitely try to fall in line more with what Maha and my colleagues are using the term apartheid, because indeed it is not a natural phenomenon. It is a man-made situation, and I think
it's a political construct. It is by design. I mean, we have to understand when we use the term. I love wearing my political science hat every now and then. That's why we got along, because we did these conversations that went everywhere because of that. But I think also too, it's like you're absolutely right. It's like the fact that when you said it's really amazing that someone used the terminology to describe looking for a location to live. Do you know you're living in a food desert? I mean, so people were aware, but at that time, I don't think they understood the impact that was having on the growth of our city. So
the other thing, what my students discovered then, even we kind of like swim in a soup of words all the time, but we know what the condition is, right? Because it was like hunger is a word that can make me feel uncomfortable at times. But when we first started researching this, it was Dr. Thompson Miller, myself, and only 4 undergrad students and 1 community partner, which was the collaboratory. And the students discovered that statistic that Dayton at the time, I can't remember the exact year, and I have all of this, I have all the footnotes and things backing this, but we were the 4th hungriest city in the nation, and that's how they worded it at the time, right? And so from there, you push forward to the most recent food summit, and we're somewhere way like beyond 40 now, which is good. And the work that we're doing has moved from 4 students. Now, every time we do Desert Kitchen, there's around 60 to 70 students involved across a minimum of 4 classes. And I'm collaborating with about 5 other professors and 6 community partners.
I love it. I love how that's expanded, because I think because of the work that you were doing, because of the work that you were doing in conjunction with your crew, with the Gem City Market, which we'll talk about, I think it's become this kind of very rich, not only just conversations and dialogue, but rich artistry, rich convenings, the richness of of just bringing people together just to connect about these subjects and talk about them. Yes, we can get lost in the word soup and the terminology, but ultimately the feelings are the same.
Yeah.
That there's humanity suffering, and we have to figure out a way to alleviate the suffering. So I know that it's like, so we're going to jump back. We're going to jump into the conversation about Gem City Market in a second. We're going
Okay.
to take a little bit of a break because that's what we do in the podcast, and we'll be right back.
I'm Christine Ray, Senior Membership Coordinator of Public Media Connect. Thank you for listening to Rodney Veal's Inspired By. This podcast is a production of CET and Think TV, 2 local PBS stations. As PBS stations, the work we do online, on air, and in the community is supported by listeners like you. If you're enjoying the show and would like to support our work, please consider becoming a member of cetconnect.org or thinktv.org. Plus, when you sign up to donate at least $5 a month, you'll get access to special members-only streaming videos on the PBS app through Passport. Learn more at cetconnect.org or thinktv.org. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
We are back from our break, and so Glenna, let's talk a little bit about the Gem City Market, because Gem City Market is a convening of a lot of folks, but your role in that, because as an activist, artist extraordinaire, person about community who's really become a Daytonian by you wrestled it to the ground and have become that. Talk about your experience, like what brought you into such a massive project like Gem City Market?
Well, I believe we were having a teach-in at the University of Dayton around the murder of Michael Brown in 2014, and Amaha was there with some students from Sinclair, and that was the first time we met. And he's like, we need to talk more. So, I mean,
total Amaha style, right?
Yeah. And so that initiated the conversation, and we were just walking through the streets of Bilbao last April 2023, right? 9 years later, going, can you believe it? We made it out of that classroom and we're here. Now, again, our trip there was the result of access and privilege that we had to be able to go on that. So in between those two things, what I learned about engaging in a community, especially being hyper aware of my positionality as a white woman, is you show up and you listen. And it's pretty simple, right? Mm-hmm. I think that I came out of a very loud and vociferous community of Southern Californians who like to express their opinions a lot. So learning to listen over the past 15 years of my life has been a real, it's taken work. But mm-hmm. When I found myself in a community that I knew they needed to, I needed to earn their trust. And the way to do that was just being in the conversation. So often that doesn't look a lot like art. So when I started teaching agri-social practice, socially engaged art, this is a genre that has, again, another word soup floats around it. And we kind of it's that thing, we know it when we see it, when it's social practice art. But I came out of an academic environment with the wonderful professors like Teddy Cruz and the art historian Grant Kester, who writes really about the history of socially engaged art. That was academic, and a lot of the art that these social practitioners were doing was more using the public space to provoke reactions or working mm-hmm. within communities, using communities as material. So there was some issues around the ethics of how things were rolling out. And
right.
We flash forward from what I saw social practice being in those earlier public performance type of provoking people and instigating conversations. I now really see it more as truly collaborating in the community, right? So this is sort of you can do just a gesture, a symbolic sort of act in your art, or you can do a true intervention. Both are fine. Both are needed. It's like Francis Alice's When Faith Moves Mountains, I always show to my class as an example, where he had in the deserts of Peru, got about over 100 people together to move a sand dune a centimeter. right? That's symbolism. It
It's
certainly
symbolic.
is,
It's
right?
a symbolic gesture
Hmm.
that speaks. But I mean, but yes,
Right. So
it's not the
it's
same thing. It's not. It's valid. It's absolutely valid. You're absolutely right. It happens in similar discourse in postmodern dance. It's like you can provoke a response or you can engage a dialogue,
right.
but they're both valid. But you have to. Where is that pathway?
Right.
I,
And again, engagement is long term, man. I mean, Francis Solis wasn't going to stay out in the desert for the rest of his life, where, you know, after I started showing up to the different projects I was doing, and again, not just Gem City Market, I also worked a lot with Latinos Unidos and communities around East Dayton and other places. You don't just pick up and leave. So that was kind of one of the
mm,
problems with earlier models or even ongoing models of social engagement, that were there for temporary or coming from the outside, engaging in a community and then pulling out. So I don't see the one thing about the work that we're doing here in Dayton. I couldn't just like pick up and do that somewhere else.
yeah, because it feels like it's very specific. I'm going to use the word site specific, but you understand what I'm saying. It's like
Mhm.
it's to us. It's just to this community. It's to the specifics of the history and the present and our vision of the future, all coming together, everything, everywhere, all at once. That decides the action. That kind of guides the decision making, especially for a creator or an educator or someone who is working with groups of people. And this is, that's why we get along so well, because we're like, oh, these ideas percolate to the surface.
Yes.
And so it's bigger than that. But that what I love about the Gem City Market is the fact that you guys are coming, both Maha and several people that were connected to it, coming from an academic background and taking on this cause of providing a social solution, which is not typical. It's really, there had to. Do you feel that there was some skepticism for the fact that you hear these artistic and academic individuals very engaged in this kind of social practices? Because all of you are,
Right.
everyone on the team. When you look at the team, you go, "Oh, this is the crew. If you want to get things done, this is the group." I mean, what was the response from the community?
There's still skepticism in the community for sure. And it's true, like Amaha doing community based participatory research, right? He's very much in the realm of social practice. I'm coming out of a visual arts program and also doing social practice. How does that involve and apply to real life? And I'd say that when Gem City Market opened and they had learned a lot about how to open a grocery store, but as many would say, not necessarily how to operate the grocery store. So that phase entered, and now still they're at this point, Gem City Market is being allowed to do its thing without interference from some of the folks who started it, but nonetheless, it's still like it's where I shop. It's the community that I go to. Yetunde Rodriguez, James Payton, myself were able to collaborate thanks to organizing by Shana McConville in order to put the mural up that's there. I mean, that was one of the greatest accomplishments. I really loved that. But I think really when I think about what was the most meaningful acts that we were doing with Gem City Market, it was really during the pandemic. And we did a lot of phone calls, wellness checks on members. And right before the pandemic, Kenya Baker and I, now Kenya Akbar, had been working with others to knock on every single freaking door around the trade area. And we were focusing nearby where I lived. And we would go out on these little jaunts, talking to people, just asking, it was called deep listening. It's not about trying to gather data. It's about having conversations. We ended up in this guy's apartment that had a Motown museum, he called it. And we would end up, being invited in and talking about, and just stand here while I cook this meal for church and ask me questions. It's fine. And when the pandemic hit and we had to stop that, it was really kind of heartbreaking. And then nonetheless, the planning, the fact that we live in a capitalist society, the market didn't stop. So they had to continue with plans to get that ground broken and build the structure. And we had learned that if you don't sell beer and wine at your grocery store, the odds of survival are far less, right? You want to make it a one-stop shop. So we had been in this was a dry zone, had been voted that way decades ago. Mm-hmm. And to repeal that took petitions and signatures. And Kenya and I went out, masks, gloves, bags of pens, knocking on doors again to get signatures so that we could file that petition. And that's a whole long story. I'll try to shut up now because there's
it's like that's.
Remember, it started in when it was cool, and then all of our signatures got rejected, and we had to go do it again. And I just remember being out there in the heat of the summer of 2020. It must have been 2020, and just sweat dripping. I'm going, please don't drip onto these signatures.
The practical matters are like it's blistering hot, and it was a hot summer.
Yeah,
there's a lot going on that summer in 2020. I mean,
yeah, that summer too, we managed, to organize with Dayton Public Schools. I was working with Simeon Oyeyemi on putting up some of the kids' artwork on the fences around Gem City Market. So we were managing to do all these things. When I look back on it, though, it was kind of like I really enjoy looking back on how we came together during that time.
Right. Because the thing is, I mean, that's the whole thing. I think we never talk about, I think we're just enough past the pandemic to kind of really look back and reflect. Like this summer, I was like, okay, this is what happened. These are the things that went down and where connectivity happened. And this is where things kind of diverged. This is where things came together. This is where things fell off the plate. I mean, that's a very legit and real thing. But the focus, what I love the fact is that Gem City figured out a way to focus in and bring art and community into its being. And I love the mural because I think it's just phenomenal.
Fun. I mean, obviously, Yetunde's designs are the basis of that whole, as the kids would say now, vibe of the market. I mean, I get to drive down that street and see that, and it's vibrant. So she brought that aspect. And then, James Pate with the incredible skills of being able to draw on paint, which are skills I do not possess, actually. So we
I'm in awe of James. Yeah, we're all in awe of James Pate.
In West Dayton at his studio, we spent like a couple weekend workshops just bringing together our different materials. I had a box of photos, and we would just go through things. And so he ended up, using many of the images within that mural are based on photographs that were taken at community cookouts that we had at the Gem City Market site before the building went up, and at Juneteenth celebration, the very first one at Gem City Market. And so there's all these memories embedded in there, and there's still the potential to add a little bit more too.
I know you're always looking for those chances to embed art.
I never know when something's finished. That's one problem. I don't know if I call it a problem. It's a condition. It's a situation.
Okay. No. Well, I was going to ask you about, because we're both art makers. When you say that, I feel like, okay, you're speaking. We're twins. That telepathic, like, when is it done? Well, or like it's never done. Do you find yourself, because of what you do and the form that you are using to convey your thoughts and ideas, photography, did you ever want to go back and do it again?
I honestly want to go back and do it again. And it took me a long time in life looking back at other artists to realize that that's what most artists are actually doing anyways. We're asking, we ask questions that aren't really intended to have a concrete answer. So revisiting them for the rest of your life, I guess if someone told you that when you're, in your 20s or early 30s, it might sound like a sentence of
it was like, I'm forever trapped in the loop.
Yes, I brought that up to my students, my capstone, photography students. I'm like, you really are going to be doing iterations of these questions for the rest of your life. And they look terrified. I'm all, oh, no.
Don't be afraid. It's all good. Jump in the water. The water's fine.
The thing is, I think that relates to actually having it not necessarily be finished is about sustainability in a way. Because no one ever talked to me as an artist. It was like, work hard, make work, hustle. It wasn't like take time and reflect on why you do this in the first place so that you can build a sustainable career in the arts. Nobody brought that up to me. Even the mentors that I love and cherish to this day, I feel like it was all supposed to be this endless puddle of work, very much the Frankfurt School, coming back, to the academic side of it, like this leftist Frankfurt School that I believed in. I'm like, give me my hat and my fatigues and I'm going to work out there with the proletariat. But there's got to be joy. You
got to enjoy this process too. It can't be drudgery. I tell people that all the time. I can akin this to, like, when I was dancing, that when I was a performer, the body ages. It gets to a point where you have worn it down. There's no one told me, like, okay, quit dancing harder, dance smarter. Take a moment to kind of. It was like, oh my, are you kidding me? They're telling me this in grad school. I'm like, oh, I could have done, the career could have gone a different way, So
right?
It's instead, no, like, to your point, no one ever said when you're making and you're starting out, they're just like, do the work.
Yeah.
It's like, no matter what. And you're like, wait a minute. Can I just sit and have a cup of tea with my friend Glenna and just sit and chill or have a beer, hang out, and just talk?
We did those things in the past. It's like, let's sit and we're going to sit and have go to the wine gallery and when its existence, have our meal and get all of our stuff out and then go back to work, and I just, my body and my mind can't really do that anymore. And my mother, who is a very hardworking person all her life, she was recently diagnosed with onset Alzheimer's, and I've been managing that, going to California and back, and she'll probably move here soon. But that sort of thing is also a great reminder of the fragility of our human condition and how, it sounds cliche, but how, precious our time really is. And I think kind of harping on the art world, but to think of creativity as something transactional and just progressively working your way towards an unseen goal, just that can't work. That's not sustainable. So I had to find a way to make the passion last. And one thing I talked about this before, though, too. There is sort of what's hard in academia too. You're going up for tenure. You've got to prove that you've done the publications and the exhibitions or whatnot. At the same time, when you're doing social advocacy work, it's not about you, right? So there's this fine line, like not wanting to do self-promotion in the face of community advocacy. So you're treading really a fine line. And I enjoyed having that conversation with Miggy at the Cincinnati Contemporary Art Center, right?
Yes, yeah.
That like a couple summers ago, we were joined by some other artists who work with social justice, and it's there are compromises that have to take place, right? You can't, especially coming to this as a white woman, I can't center myself in those projects. So
without it seeming like it's become this self-serving project,
right?
I think people have to understand, like young artists and art makers and thought makers, that it is a fine line. Like, is it, and so yeah.
I guess, and there's more I could say around that. But the idea of something being finished also, I remember with the At Table series in 2019, I had been awarded a Robert Rauschenberg residency through Photo Lucida for that. I had exhibitions coming up and offers to publish the work. And then suddenly it was 2020. And a lot of that fell through. And the one exhibition I had during the pandemic in Portland, Oregon was like closed to the public. The things, it was physically hanging there, but everything was just went online. And I was fortunate because I had a sabbatical then. I had to stay in Portland. I went and I spent like a month driving across this country during the pandemic and starting some new work that I spoke about at PK last night, which is about backyards and belonging. And
oh wow, I was going to ask you about new work.
Figuring out how to create joy on stolen lands. Essentially, how do we do that? But the point is, if people had asked me, when is that table over? When are you done? Maybe, move on to the next thing. And I'm like, well, if I had stopped that, I have that photo of, Amaha and Leela and I in Spain sitting at a table a few months ago. Like, it just doesn't end. There's always the opportunity to resurrect a project, maybe career-wise or strategy-wise or transaction-wise. There's decisions about that are work better than others. But on the level of like human wellness and compassion, you just keep sustaining the questions that you want to ask and the projects you want to do.
Right. And that, I don't think people really understand, like, like the pandemic, that pausing, because I couldn't be in contact with individuals. Same here. It's like, I create movement, and so I ended up setting work on myself, I started going, oh, what if and then I started moving back into the art making practice. And so it sounds like you took the opportunity of isolation to go in a completely, let's do something. Don't just stop. So I guess there's a question in there somewhere, Glenna. I promise you there's a question there somewhere. But I think that there's something there about what would you tell people who maybe got stuck or stopped by the last couple of years? And we're talking a 3-year time frame that really has stopped everything. What do you say to those creative people, especially those working in social justice? Because social justice, the issues we dealt with, amplify. What do you say to those artists who want to go in this pathway now, or have maybe we got stopped by things?
I was very curious. Oh man, how do I say this part? Like in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, where there was a lot of white people and artists were gaining more interest in wanting to generate book lists and read the right things and watch the right things and do the right things and have the conversations that some of us had been having for many years. And that's wonderful. Yes, indeed, let's talk. But I was wondering, what is this going to look like in 2023? What is this going to look like in 2027? And I think that sometimes, and I'm speaking from my positionality, right, my identity, that people wanted to take on everything. They wanted to get it right and move on. And there is no getting it right. There is only moving on. And so I feel fortunate that before that moment in our sort of collective history, I had already committed to remaining a student of anti-racism for the rest of my life. I knew there was no checking of a box
right
around this kind of work. So I just think that I would love people to embrace, first of all, you can't do everything. Find the cause. Like for food justice is both a reality, and it also stands in as a metaphor for other issues that are the product of systemic injustices. And so by focusing on food justice, it's allowed me to, when I get overly exuberant and I wanted to be like helping this political campaign or attending this thing about housing rights, like, no, you're doing food justice. Like focus.
focus. I mean, I think that's important for people to know that. I mean, I took, because I was thinking, somebody asked me that question about that role as someone who, as an African American who's male, very clearly always feeling as if there's a target on one's back. I mean, no matter how successful you become, America, world, will always have that sensation to be the leader, to be, let me just focus in on changing the institutions that I can. Let me focus on being at the table to help redirect policy, redirect thought behind the ideology of an organization. It took 2020 for that to kick in for me.
Mhm.
I go, do that. I mean, so when people ask me, I'm like, nope, I can't do it. I can't do it. The other stuff. I need to do this.
And I
And this is where the change happens.
it kind of occurred to me that what we're sort of fighting for is everybody's right to just wellness, right? The pressure on my friends and communities of color to be excellent and the best has been so strong. And that correlates back to this idea that I was coming out of this environment as an artist in grad school, where you have to be excellent and the best. And, we all should just be allowed to be. There is no one example of excellence. There is no best, right? It's kind of like there is no box to check. So if we can create a world where, everybody has the same access to opportunities, regardless of however they're neurally informed or their
whatever it is,
identities are, then that's what we want. We want people to have the right to be actually mediocre.
I'm going to paraphrase Chris Rock, who said, "I just want the ability to suck and then come back and do it, try something new again."
Oh God, I love that.
I want the ability to suck.
like that.
Wow.
That's kind of what it is too about that whole. I never feel that anything is right. I'm incredibly hard on myself, and people are always telling me that, and I'm working on it. Okay, but
I think you're getting there. You're there. You're getting
That's
there.
why I need deadlines and things like that. Brings me back to thinking of us in those rooms the summer of 2012, just in frenzies, getting punch drunk with art making. It's that kind of frenzy was very needed for me at those times in my life. And now I've learned a little. I don't want to call it time management, because that is just a word that fits back into the freaking system and the hustle system. But just a way to say, oh, right, I can suck right now, and then I can come back and I can do it again.
Exactly. It's like, and there's no harm, and it's not fatalistic. It's not fatal. I think there's a fatalism that drives our hurt, the punching, the constant work. It's the fatalism of, if you don't, you're going to fail. And if you fail, you don't exist. I mean, that's very, very angsty existential crisis, but that's really what drives that force. And when we're at this point, not so much.
It's that whole thing that goes around in some useful memes and stuff. Now you have a tendency to fear scarcity, and they think that if someone gets this part of the pie, then I don't get any pie, and there's that the difference, I think, comes down to sometimes fear versus curiosity about other people. But see, when there's curiosity towards another community, then you can still have exploitation occurring, right? Fear results in oppression, but curiosity can indeed result in exploitation. So you have to have this careful balance. But I feel that in general, as a world right now, people are afraid of things running out. So they're doing the hustle. And I just would like everybody to have an opportunity to sit down at the table and eat with me, and I'll take your photo.
That is that, and that's such a joyous place. I think that's the best place we could end this conversation.
Yeah,
I love it. I mean, so Glenna, as always, every time I get together with you, I get excited, I get motivated. I'm like, okay, and we're going to hang out in whatever iteration of the Wine Gallery exists in this world,
right?
And it will happen. It will occur. So Glenna, thank you for taking time out of your day and just being, which is great. We're just being.
just being, that was nice, because I think I was a bit esoteric, and I didn't even talk about the Moral Courage Project, which I wanted to give a shout out to those folks.
Oh, well, we can talk about it right now. We don't have to stop. Like talk about it. Okay,
It occurred to me
because it's that's your newest project. That is.
It is, well, and it's,
that was,
it's like
it isn't.
Tandem, right? Because I don't really center myself in that work, but around 2016, I began working with Dr. Joel Proust and Natalie Hudson and the University of Dayton's Human Rights Center on this project through our partner of Proof Media for Social Justice, Leora Kahn, who's based in New York. And this is a storytelling multimedia project that looks at upstanders in communities, in marginalized communities or in vulnerable situations. It tells the stories of people who have, taken risks or against great odds have helped others in their communities. And so because it's focused through the language of human rights, we first looked at immigration on the border, and we went to El Paso and Juarez, Mexico in 20.
You took a group of students.
Took a group of students. We have around 15 students every time, somewhere around there, and there are undergrads from all different majors. So my role is really, along with Leora, who used to be photo editor for Magnum and has a lot of experience in photography as well as human rights, just mentoring the students so that they can go out and do this kind of editorial work. So it's very different from the art world and even from social justice. Like, I have to then put on the hat of photojournalist and the kind of ethics behind documentary photography. And so I myself was working alongside my students. Our work would be shown next to one another without any hierarchy. And that was the coolest thing for me, like just working in the field with these students. We got a chance to go back a second time, just myself and the two of our image producers, Annie Denton and Maura Parker, and spend a week in El Paso and visit our artist friends in Juarez on the other side of the border. And it was just incredible being able to, the shift that this had for students who hadn't understood the border. Now, the border is a huge part of my life before I came here, in the sense that, I was born in San Diego and kind of grew up around a border culture where there's a sort of, it's a porous situation. I studied Spanish. I moved to South America and became as fluent as I could. And then when I moved here, one of the things I miss most about home is essentially Mexico. But going to El Paso was a whole other world. And just flash forward, sorry that this is too much, but we also looked at water, right?
Too much.
During the pandemic, we got shut down. Obviously, we were supposed to go to Appalachia. We had been down to Eastern Kentucky. The educators had taken a trip there in December 2019 and met some water activists and other creatives in that area. We were just pumped to go back. I mean, it is just so beautiful, and there's so much to tell about the courage of folks fighting the system there in that region of Appalachia. And then as well, Flint. We were also in touch with folks in Flint. Eventually, I did get to go to Flint and meet Gina Lester and take photos. But the students did not get to travel in 2020, but they still managed to go online, interview dozens of people, and create a podcast.
Wow.
And make some of the best artwork. Like by Rio Gordon Parker made these wonderful animations to go with this project. So I was so proud of the work on water rights that they did. And this past 2022 in May, we went to Oakland, California, and looked at the housing crisis there. And currently, I'm working with Jayana Johnson, who is a photo student from Cleveland. And she's in her third year now. And so far, since coming to Dayton, we've been able to travel to Oakland together, work in the field together. She got a fellowship through the Imagining Community Symposium, which is national. She was the youngest artist to receive one of their fellowships last year. So we got to travel to New Orleans together so she could be with the cohort of other artists there and continue working on projects. And her and I are about to travel in October to Providence, Rhode Island, to present the work that we did in Oakland around housing rights, gentrification, and unhoused populations. And there'll be a book that'll be available somehow. We don't know how, but we have a beautiful book coming out.
So there's, like I said, there's the wheels are turning. You're
Yeah.
constantly working, but it's in a different way,
Yeah.
which is so refreshing. I mean, so I think it's a great project, and I love the fact that you're bringing students and young people into this mentorship, not in a hierarchical sense, because I don't think it's a mentorship in that way. It's like let's be together and let's figure these things out
Yeah.
and share in that commonality of discovery, which is the twin of curiosity, the
Yeah.
discovery. And then that way it allows and affords for their work and their vision of the world and their sort of voice, which is always, that word's overused, to manifest itself, which is exciting.
Yeah.
Like that's where the excitement is, right?
And again, I'm really interested in the sustainability of passion and energy thing. So I reached this year for Dinner in the Desert Kitchen. Last year, we worked with Unified Power and Kenya Akbar and her organization. We raised some funding for them through our art auction, and that looked at the history of sugar production, which was a really heavy. It was actually quite difficult for the students. I mean, that's a heavy history to carry. So this year I decided, instead of doing it with the undergrads, I was going to go back to the graduates and the alumni and say, how has food justice entered your life or your creative world since you left? And are you in a creative world? And let's be honest, like, do you have time for it? Did all of the art making you did in school as an undergrad, do you do it still? Do you miss it? Is it a hobby? Is it a vocation? So I'm working with 5 students, and it's really amazing because it's from New Orleans, San Diego, New York, Cincinnati, and Dayton.
Wow.
Two of whom, Jaleesa Robinson works at Gem City Market now, was a student in the very first food justice cohort, and Grace Poppy, who's in New York and got her MFA, was also in that cohort. And the others were in the very first 2016 cohort. And they all have very different jobs, and art is still in their lives in very different ways: graphic design, art education, painters, photographers. So it's going to be interesting. We're in that messy phase of, obviously we're doing this online a lot. I'm meeting with them online, but there'll be an opening at Index Gallery December 1st, where you can see the work of these returning alumni.
And the Index Gallery is at Front Street, correct?
The Index Gallery is now at the Hub.
The Hub.
The Hub
Okay.
is where I teach most of the time now, and we have a photo studio there where I partner with our artist in residence, Sean Curtis, who's
Who I adore.
Yes,
Yeah, absolutely.
So that has been one of the highlights of the last 2 years. Emerging out of the pandemic, Sean and I connected, and haven't really looked back. We're working on some things together. He does his own business operating out of there, but it's kind of like studio partners, and it keeps that space really active at the Hub.
It does, and he's producing some phenomenal things. I mean, that's the thing. That's what I love about Glenna. It's like when we talk, it's like I think as soon as this podcast is over, I know I'm heading over to Front Street because I've got artwork showing at the Dyad Gallery.
Oh,
so it's
cool.
like,
oh my God, it's First Friday.
It's First Friday. Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot going. See, there's more. It never stops.
I know.
It never
like
stops.
All these other things, and yet I'm still gonna have to just sit here and wait for Guided by Voices.
wait for the concert. It's all golden. It's all golden.
We're barbecuing for the boys. So
that'll be awesome. I love it. All right, Glenna.
Well,
okay.
Thank you so much for having me. It really means a lot. I know we've talked about doing this forever. We talk about getting together. We're both similar in that we're like frenetically involved in things that we even forget all the things we're doing, which is why I kept you longer here. But, I love you, and I really thank everybody involved for having me here. Thanks to Anne and Michael and everybody.
It's always a pleasure, Glenna. It's always a good time hanging out with Glenna Jennings, and that's what people should know. So it's super cool. Thanks, Glenna.
Rodney Veals Inspired By is a production of Public Media Connect, the regional partnership of CET in Cincinnati and Think TV in Dayton. There's a lot of great art happening around Southwest Ohio, and we're excited to be part of it. If you like this episode, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can learn more and find the show notes at thinktv.org/inspired by or cetconnect.org/inspired by. Thank you.